Serious, skeptics of Reddit, what moment in your life convinced you about the existence of ghosts or the afterlife? When I was a baby, we lived in a very old, freaky house. My mom was half convinced that it was haunted as small things, toys, medicines, and pieces of jewelry kept going missing. Sometimes she swore that I was interacting with thin air. She thought that perhaps it was a mischievous child ghost. One night, my mom put me to bed, she gave me a blanket and a pacifier, and left the room once I was asleep. An hour went by and I was awake and crying. She came in to soothe me and found that my pacifier was missing. She thought I spat it out or flung it out of the cot. She searched the room, pulled the cot apart, shook out all my blankets, checked my clothes and could not find the pacifier. Mom, probably sleep deprived, decided she was going to scold the ghost. She put me back in my cot, left the room, closed the door and in her best mom voice said sternly, "That is enough. You give that back right now." She waited a few moments, and I stopped crying. Mom came to check me again. My pacifier was back in my mouth. Our dog died a year ago. We buried him in the garden with some nice flowers covering the burial so no one really notices, but we know. A week after we buried him, a robin came by. We never noticed it in the past, and now from time to time the robin shows up. Unlike most birds in the wild, this robin comes and sits very close to our patio where all other birds stay in the garden and swoop away when we get near or go in the garden. This specific robin doesn't show fear and it feels like it comes from time to time to say hello, hang around for a couple of minutes, then leaves. My girlfriend is kinda convinced it's our dog reincarnated coming to say hello once in a while. Personally, I don't believe in afterlife, ghost or whatever. Dead is dead. It is all in the mind. She is the same way, but in this case we just like the idea of the robin filling up the gap our beloved dog left behind. Just makes shitty things in life more bearable. A few days after my mother had passed away, I was at the park with my boyfriend at the time and my mom's little dog. I had just let the little guy off leash to go for his run when out of nowhere I had this overwhelming feeling of being enveloped by the most absolute, pure love and comfort. It felt like my mom was all around me, very hard to explain but almost like when you hug someone and you just feel them and their energy surrounding you. I felt completely at peace and had this resound feeling that everything would be alright. I rationalized my experience by telling myself it was just my grief over missing my mom so much and went about my day as usual without telling anyone, other than my partner who was with me at the time and didn't share my experience. The next day I was at home with my older brother, the previous day's events completely forgotten by now. We were hanging out in his room when, of course, the topic of mom came up. This is gonna sound crazy but I had the weirdest thing happen yesterday afternoon. Out of nowhere I just felt completely at peace and like she was here with me. Just about cut him off mid-sentence. That's not crazy. I had the exact same thing happen to me yesterday too. Turns out we had both felt our mom and the feeling complete love and comfort at the exact same time. To this day I don't have a rational explanation for it. My brother and I hadn't spoken to each other at all the day it happened, and the following day was the first time we sat down to chat. I'd like to think it was our mom coming to say one last goodbye and let us know we were gonna be okay. I've had two really strange experiences over the course of my life. Back in the 80s, fell asleep in my teenage sister's room because she was at work and there was a phone in her room. That was a thing, phones tied to one spot. I had a sleep paralysis episode which I was prone to, where I saw a shadowed girl standing in the doorway to the room, not really doing anything but being creepy and menacing me while I couldn't move. I phased back into sleep, then later my sister got home and kicked me out of her room so she could go to bed. Next morning, we are all getting ready for school. I hear my sister talking to my mother about the nightmare she had about the girl standing in her door frame staring at her while she slept. She had the same description of the apparition. I felt a really cold shock hearing her talking about it. Don't know what it meant, but at the time we both kinda thought it was a deceased grandmother appearing as a young woman. It kinda looked like old pictures of her. 2000s, laying down to nap midday, drifting off at the edge of sleep, and suddenly I hear a scream that jerks me wide-eyed awake, startled, scared shitless, and has me looking inside and out of my empty apartment. It was freaky, but when I found no screamer, I assumed I just had a weird dream/REM brain fart event even though I was just drifting off to sleep. Then my fiancée calls me from her car and starts chatting while I'm still getting my head straight, and when she pauses for a breath I ask, "Hey. You didn't happen to just scream really loud, did you?" She says, "Well, I did a minute ago. This guy driving was being a jerk and I was super aggravated and I just screamed." Why? She was miles away. I'm a skeptic. I had a couple of weird experiences that I don't know what exactly happened. It's weird, unknown, I don't dismiss it, but I don't say it was a ghost, spirit, or telepathy either. It's still more reasonable to assume the events were a strange confluence of naturally occurring events. Lived in a house that was haunted for 2 years in my 20s. It's late and I'm too lazy to type it out, but it was an eye-opening experience. I never saw anything, but things would move, and the air just felt so heavy. When we were looking for a new place, my wife did the house hunting as I was busy with work. The first time I ever stepped foot in the place was moving day and I had a stack of boxes in my hands. I stopped dead at the door. It was a feeling I have never felt before. I said out loud, "Therese, something here." From day one, it was never anything too crazy, and after a while it was kind of comforting. When you were alone, you never felt alone. And it was just random things. One of our first nights there we left for a bit and I yelled, "Okay ghosty, don't do anything while we're gone." Came home that night and all of our shoes were gone from the front entrance. They were all lined single file down the hallway on the other side of the house. There was a big glass chandelier in the living room with hundreds of glass beads. You'd just be sitting there watching TV and look up and one of the beads would be swinging around super faster. The chandelier was in the middle of the room with our couch off to the side against the wall. We would come home and one of the beads would be sitting on the couch. Nothing too wild, a bit of a prankster ghost I suppose. We rented from an elderly lady who lived in a separate house that shared a driveway with our house. I always felt it was her husband. The heavy air and never feeling alone is what everyone felt. As weird as it seems, I never met my grandfather, but I've always known him. I've always to an extent believed in spiritualism, but if I had to go to one exact moment, it was when I was 14 years old. At the time I was clinically depressed, so I didn't have much thought about my future. Between that and my father being as mean as he was, I almost did myself in. But what stopped me was something to this day I could never explain, like a burst of sadness rushed through me causing me not to do it. My grandfather on my mother's side passed away when I was less than a year old. Little did I know I knew him for so long. That same night I had a dream of a man in an old army uniform. He said to me, "Get back up, war's not over yet." Next time I saw that man was in a picture on my uncle's Facebook page talking about how he was a military police officer for the army. It sounds made up, but I can assure you it's not, because I didn't even know he was in the army until I talked to my grandmother about him. God bless his soul, and wherever you are, thanks for helping me through it all. I never believed in any ghosts or paranormal shit until I saw something that couldn't be explained by anything else. There's an old dirt road I take sometimes. It passes by a really small cemetery, like 10 gravestones, that sits unfenced at an intersection on the road. One night while driving home in the middle of the winter, I saw a naked old man dancing at the stop sign kitty corner to the cemetery. He was so thin his skin looked like it was tightly wrapped around his bones, and he had this sad look on his face despite his lively movement. I thought I was seeing things, until I saw him again in the spring. I was driving down the same road at night going about 120 kilometers per hour when he slammed on my car window with his fists. I swerved into the middle of the road and then back into my lane. There's no way a person could have been at the same speed as my vehicle, yet I saw him clear as day. I pulled over, got out of my car and looked around with a flashlight to make sure there wasn't someone or something there that I didn't see. Nothing. I went home a bit on edge. The next morning in the same spot was a fresh dog carcass with its head missing. I don't drive down that road at night anymore. So, I don't really remember too much of this, as I was very young, but my parents filled me in with a fair amount of details semi-recently. I was probably about 4 or so at the time, at my old house with a play kitchen in my room. Completely unpowered, with a simple plastic microwave. All of a sudden, the microwave began to heat up, and I saw a figure with physical features I can't quite remember, but it appeared to be an older woman. I ran downstairs crying, "Mommy. Witch, burn, scare me." Or something along the lines of that. I brought my moms upstairs and pointed at the witch in my closet, attempting to describe what they looked like. My stepmom said I described something pretty close to her grandmother, although I can't quite remember what features gave that away. That was my personal experience, but my moms have recounted countless others. Here are a few. My stepmom told me about a time where my mom and I were out running errands while she was cooking dinner for the night. What's strange is when she went to the restroom, She came back to her ingredients and utensils scattered in different places in the kitchen. Next, a bit of a creepier one. My moms would be sound asleep at night, and then hear loud noises coming from my bedroom, like thumping or crashing. Then, they would come up to my room, and see me completely sound asleep in my bed. Other miscellaneous occurrence, I had one of those metal word walls, where you could arrange words to sentences and such. Obviously, I could barely read, and I didn't really touch the wall, but my moms noticed that words on the wall were arranged to say messy room, which could have been nothing, but a little weird. It was my mother that was the skeptic and this really freaked her out. She still talks about it. This took place when I was 6, I think. My great-grandma, Mom's grandma, lived in a different city, about 6 hours away. She had gotten injured and been in the hospital for a few days, so we drove up to see her. She seemed fine, and was released the day we arrived, so I never even saw her in the hospital, just at her apartment. We stayed in the area for a few days and visited with family, cause we only got to see them a few times a year, then we came home. A couple days after we came home, I went to my mom and told her that Grandma Helen, my great-grandma that we had visited, had died and we needed to pack up and go back to city that my great-grandma lived in. My mom told me that everything was fine and nobody had died, but I was insistent. After about 30 minutes she convinced me to go and have a bath. While I was in the bath, the phone rang. It was my mother's cousin, telling my mom that Grandma Helen had just died. I had trouble believing in ghosts, especially since I'm more of logical explanation type of person. But that changed because of these weird occurrences. Some backstory, my stepdad and mom got married and rented out this big house perfect for 3 daughters, 1 son, and a dog to live in. My older stepsister and I shared this big room together while my younger siblings got their own room. The first few months were fine, but once we got settled completely, things started acting weird. I remember waking up to my older stepsister whispering to me to wake up. As I'm about to ask her what's wrong, it was like the whole room shook, but mostly her bed. At first I thought she was shaking it, but I look at her and she has this absolute look of terror and jumps to my bed. We look over and hear knocks and scratches coming from her bed. I immediately think, it's an animal. I tell her I'll look under it and catch it and stuff, all the while freaking out on the inside. I look under the bed, nothing. Look behind the bed, nothing. At this point, the room was quiet. Looked at the walls and tried to press my ears against it. I tell her it's probably a squirrel or a possum that's stuck in the wall. But the thing I couldn't comprehend was how an animal could knock so well and loudly while scratching. We try and go back to bed, but it comes back with vengeance. Super loud and so much happening. I tell my stepsister that we're getting our dad. It's super late and he's mad. He comes over into our room and it's absolutely silent. No noise except for our panicked breathing. He looks under the bed and sees nothing. He says to never bother him again unless we have a physical thing attacking us. We both reluctantly go back to bed, trying to ignore the occasional scratch and shake of the room. This continues to happen for the next few years. At that point, I realize it wasn't an animal because there was no way it could have survived that long in the wall without food or water. Also, the fact it was making loud knocks and shaking the bed vigorously made it seem impossible for it to be a living animal. One night a few months after the bed stuff started, the TV we had in the room turned on by itself. It was at full volume and was blaring static. I remember my stepsister and bolting upright and her yelling at me to turn it off. The remote wouldn't work, so I had to run up and turn it off manually. Then, we went back to sleep. The next morning, we both realized what happened and thought how weird it was as. I turned on the TV with a remote that wasn't working before, and the TV was on an episode of Friends with the volume at a normal number. The next few years, all my siblings had weird stuff going on in their respective rooms. They have their own stories and I have mine. My older stepsister started getting these nightmares about the room, my younger brother's door would get opened and closed hard, and my younger sister just felt something touching her. We all tried to tell our parents about the weird stuff going on and they didn't believe us at all. I was especially hurt because they know how logically inclined I am, but they still didn't believe me. We gave up after a whole 2 years of trying. This was when I realized that I needed to bless the room. I didn't think it would work, but my sister and I were losing sleep and were getting downright irritated. Surprisingly, it worked and the scratching, knocking, and shaking stopped after almost 3 years of dealing with it. Here's some other silly stuff that happened. My bra got thrown off the counter when I was about to take a shower. I was just annoyed and told the thing to stop throwing my stuff. I heard a box in my closet get knocked down very hard. I just walked out the room because I just didn't want to deal with it. One time my friend and I were chilling and we hear knocking on random parts of the house. I tell the spirit or whatever to knock it off and it stops. My friend freaks out but I tell it's fine and to ignore it. This happened recently in 2020 around fall. My stepdad was working from home in his office space when he saw a white figure walk in the room, look around, and then walk out. My stepdad freaked out and grabbed his gun to search the house. He found nothing out of place. He immediately texted me saying that he saw something and that he thinks it might have been a ghost. I told him that yeah, it's okay and it won't hurt him. After dealing with ghosts for over 6 to 7 years, I wasn't afraid of them and knew how they worked. He went on to apologize for not believing me and how he thought I was just a kid with a vibrant imagination. So, those are my experiences. I probably have more I forgot about, but this is pretty long already. I don't really deal with them much anymore, but the room is just super cold all the time. When I was young, we lived in a house that was built in 1910. It was a very nice house, but a murder had taken place there and the house was sold to us for very cheap. Not to make this post too long, but this is what my family members and I experienced. We are kids around this time, about 20 years ago. My sister was laying in bed waiting for my mom to get done using the restroom so she could go to sleep with her. Well, in the front of the room was a window and just outside the window a white glowing woman appeared. My sister freaked while my mom quickly rushed in. My mom also saw the figure and both still back it to this day. Brother went to use the restroom one night and came face to face with a very tall black figure. He ran to my mom's room where he cried himself to sleep. Brother and sister were playing patty cake essentially instead of going to bed one night. As they played around, a large lump elevated the blanket and moved across the bed. My brother thought it was me, but I was only a baby at the time. He smacked the blanket for it to only get back up and travel to the end of the bed where it disappeared. Both back this to this day. I woke up one night to get a drink of water from the kitchen. It's probably 1 a.m. and no one is awake. When I get my glass of water, I hear a loud scream/shriek. It's a scream that will haunt me forever and have a permanent spot in my brain. At dinner time, the whole family would hear constant footsteps going up and down our stairs. Dad always brushed these things off. Chandelier would also swing at random times. Mom would catch glimpses of a little boy darting across the hallway, as well as her cloths be pulled when she would do the dishes. I'm glad we moved out of that house because it was scary as shit. I live in a house built in the 1890s that's split into 4 apartments. I've lived here for 9 years, originally with my college sweetheart/baby daddy. When he cheated on me and left, I was 23 with a 2-year-old. I was sad. But it was a deeper sad. Not depression, I have that too, but one night it was just a different, deeper kind of emptiness. I was laying in bed, and suddenly I was aware I wasn't alone. I opened my eyes and I saw an outline of a young girl standing next to my bed/face. Then she disappeared, but I could hear the sound of a hand running along my sheets as if she was walking away. The craziest part is that I wasn't scared, I felt comforted. She wanted to help me. Flash forward a year or so. I was in the same bed and so sad over something. I got that feeling that I wasn't alone again. I looked around and I saw her again, but at the foot of my bed. I felt comforted again. I still live here, and I know she's here. I can feel her, but I can't see her. Just those 2 times, so it's neat. About 5 years since the last time. I'm grateful to have someone looking out for me. I wish I could learn about her. I have so many stories, but I'll try to just say a few. Most recent, I woke up in the middle of the night facing the wall and the whole room was lit up like a light was on. I roll over and the ceiling fan light wasn't on, but it looked like a sun was shining in the corner. I wear glasses so it was hard to focus, and it was the middle of the night, but at the last moment I see a face right in front of mine, and then the light went out and it was pitch black again. When I was a kid, I would feel the bed breathing, and also I would feel pressure in my legs like a person or dog sitting on my legs. I was sick and home alone one day. For context, I had a room with a closet with no doors. I was chilling with my chihuahua, Tasha, and suddenly hangers started flying out of the closet. Then we would hear something in the other room, so she would run out there to bark, and then hangers would start flying again. It was luring the dog out of the room. Luckily my grandma lived right next door, so even though I was sick, I packed Tasha and I up and ran over there. Was never a skeptic, but last year when I saw one of my shoes that was about 12 feet away just drop from about 2 feet in the air, land and roll on its side. I can still hear the slap of it hitting the floor and me being in disbelief. I didn't see it rise, but just saw it drop. There is nothing that can explain it other than the presence of some other dimension. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more.